start up, if that's all right, just so that we don't lose anyone online as well, because I think there's quite a large group online as well. Thank you everybody for joining us online. So thanks first of all for coming to the session, much appreciated. I know it's lunchtime on the first day, so this is a tough ask to get people to come out here, and it's difficult to be smelling all the sweet desserts as well from this spot here, so forgive me. So my name's Guy Wright, I'm the Executive Editor of PLOS Water, and I'm joined here by Ryan Cronk from the Water Institute at UNC. And we're just going to take you through a little presentation about getting your science published, and in particular being part of the UNC Water and Health Conference special collection, a bit of a mouthful, with the PLOS journals that we have. So this is what we're going to go through today. So we'll do an introduction to what PLOS is, what our journals are, the publishing process with PLOS, super high level, but we'll go through that. Then we'll look at publishing in the actual collection itself, the UNC Water and Health Collection, and then we'll just finish off with a very informal discussion, question and answers with a couple of our PLOS editors that we have in the audience with us, Alison Parker and Amy Pickering, and myself and Ryan as well. We can take questions too. So to kick us off, introduction to PLOS and our journals. So this is who we are. Public Library of Science is what PLOS stands for, and we're all about empowering researchers to transform science. So PLOS is a non-profit, open access publisher. It was launched with the intention to kind of subvert and transform a very traditional publishing system, basically, that relied on subscription journals, right? So the idea was to break boundaries by having a set of open access journals as an alternative to that kind of traditional system of dissemination of research. We also launched the first journal that was multidisciplinary publication that was independent of novelty or impact as a publication criteria. You might know it as PLOS One, a journal that was launched some time ago. And we're also really supportive of open science and open data more specifically as well. We'll get into that a little bit later. So these are the attributes that all of the PLOS journals share. So they're diverse and interdisciplinary by design. All the research that appears in them is ethically and methodologically rigorous, and that's something that they all share in common. They're grounded in open science principles, so that's open data, but other aspects of what you'd refer to as open science. And importantly, everything that you see in a PLOS journal is always free to read, to publish, and importantly to reuse, which is an important part of open access, which is this thing on the bottom left here. All underpinned by Creative Commons licenses known as CC BY licenses. These are the most liberal and permissive type of license that you can publish under. And then I'll introduce you to a couple of our journals. So this is PLOS Water. This is the specific journal that I'm here to represent this week, and this is our kind of senior editorial team. So we have Jenna Davis, who I think many of you know as well, as a frequent visitor to the UNC Water and Health Conference. She can't be here this week. She apologises for that, or else she'd be obviously here as well. We have Pierre Horvitz as well, who's more of a sort of water ecologist, I guess, environmental scientist based at Edith Cowan University, and then myself, representative for PLOS. So we're backed by a really wonderful and diverse editorial board as well. As I mentioned, a couple of our editors are here today, and there's many more actually that are here presenting at the conference as well this week. And that is some information in case you wanted to find out more about the scope or the other bits and pieces about the journal. And the mission of the journal here, so this is really important, but really it was launched in order to provide an open access venue that brought together people relevant to the study of water for people and planet, basically. So that's really important, super diverse and very inclusive in terms of the scope. We're all about amplifying the diverse set of voices that are part of that discourse around freshwater issues and so on. And we're also really keen on, as I mentioned, driving forward the open science agenda within water. And that really is a way to try and foster an understanding and empower different communities to basically act and take action on improving water security and use of fresh water. The scope is quite hard to describe because it's basically everything to do with fresh water. So it's easier to describe what's out of scope than what is in of scope. But if you think of water as a resource, then pretty much you're going to be along the right lines of what's the scope for the journal. So you're talking, of course, all areas of WASH, so that's water, sanitation and hygiene, resource recovery and use, water policies, management, everything basically to do with the consumption and management of water, essentially. The other journal that we have involved in this collection is a journal called PLOS, Sustainability and Transformation. And this is headed up by Unai Pascual at the Basque Centre for Climate Change in Spain. And I have an equivalent at PLOS, Hannah Harwood, whose name and email address is there, and she looks after the journal for PLOS. So the PLOS Sustainability and Transformation, or S&T for short, as I'll refer to it. The mission there is a little bit different, but basically the idea there is, as you can see, to empower key decision makers to take immediate action for a more sustainable future, basically, in short. So it's all about sustainability in terms of planetary health, in terms of climate change, in terms of public health, and in terms of global resources as well. So very broad, deliberately, and there's obviously some scope overlap as well with PLOS Water. And this is how they fit into the PLOS journal architecture, essentially. So I won't spend too long on this, but this is just to give you a sense of where they fit and how we kind of organise our journals of PLOS. So you have the original two journals that were launched by PLOS, which is PLOS Medicine and PLOS Biology, right at the top there. Very, very broad scope, obviously cover two really big areas, and very highly selective in terms of the novelty and the kind of impact that you're supposed to demonstrate as part of work being published in those journals. Then you have these ones in the nice, lovely light green here, which include sustainability and transformation. Those are journals that are specific, community-focused, field-specific journals, so narrower in scope, still selective, however, so they still ask for papers to demonstrate some form of broad interest or significance within the field. Then you've got the group of journals that include PLOS Water, but also climate, global public health, mental health, and in fact PLOS One as well. So they're a little group of journals. And the idea behind them is they're super broad, really, really general, big area, as you can see. And in the case of PLOS One, it's every area across research and development. And the idea there is that they're very inclusive, but they are curated journals focused on a specific community, but not requiring that research demonstrates that kind of subjective novelty or broad interest, basically. And there's, of course, a lot of movement of papers that might be submitted at one point in here and then might be suggested to another journal at some point because of better suitability, basically. And just a couple of key facts about the two journals that are part of the UNC collection. Both launched in 2021, so still quite new. Had their first issues in February 2022 and October 2021 respectively, and they've published 300 articles in the case of PLOS Water and 100 articles so far in the case of S&T. They're both indexed in most of the key important indexes that you might be aware of, so Directory of Open Access Journals, that's DOAJ, Google Scholar, Dimensions, Crossref, and PLOS Water has just been indexed in Scopus as well as of 2 weeks ago, which is great. Just to preempt the question, they're not yet in the Web of Science, which is the indexer that gives out an impact factor. We do have applications actively in for both journals for that indexer. It's just they take a long time, an unbelievably long time, in order to evaluate those applications and essentially sign out impact factors to those journals. So we won't have one for a while yet. And then typical publication times for both journals, somewhere between 5 to 6 months from first submission through to public or through to acceptance of an article. So publishing with PLOS, how does it actually work in practice? So as I mentioned, the publication criteria between those two journals, PLOS Water and PLOS S&T, really quite similar. They share a lot of facets, but the key difference is that top one there. So I'll just repeat it because it's worth bearing in mind. So PLOS Water, you've got to demonstrate that your paper does contribute to the base of scientific knowledge. It can't just be a carbon copy of something that's existed before. However, it doesn't have to demonstrate any kind of subjective, I guess, broad interest or significance or novelty or whatever else however else you might describe it. In contrast, PLOS S&T, you do have to demonstrate what's written as the website as high importance and broad interest for the field, which is subjective, but does create that kind of, a slightly different criteria to PLOS Water. Everything else they share in common. So you can see there, we still ask for the methods to be reported completely, and research has to be reproducible in the papers that get published in the journal. Data has to adhere to our open science policies, so that is that, for the most part, data should be made what's known as fair, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and available as well. It has to be on a repository, ideally, unless there's a good reason not to be on a repository. And then finally, research in the journal should be obviously original, but also adhere to those kind of strict methods and ethics criteria that you would have, according to whichever community that you are part of. This is the kind of stuff that we publish. So research articles makes up the bulk of what we do. You'll be familiar, obviously, with the format of that that type of article. They're focused on a specific defined research question. Also includes articles that would come under the categories of things like systematic reviews or meta-analyses or scoping reviews, that kind of material. Since they're, for the most part, still looking at a defined research question, they fall under the category of research articles. The good news is that the format of those is super flexible in PLOS journals, which is great. We don't have a template. We don't ask you to format your references in a strange way before then at peer reviewing. It's format agnostic until you go through the peer review process, are accepted, and then things are formatted at the other end, basically. But we do have submission guidelines online that kind of walk you through the process and do provide templates and so on if you need it. The other three article types are what we call narrative style pieces in the journal. So these are kind of forward-looking, opinionated style articles, I guess, that go about addressing kind of a key question within, specific to PLOS water within water. So the first one is narrative reviews. So these are, as it says there, overview of recent developments in a particular field. They're not comprehensive pieces that that overlook an entire field over the last 10 years. They're more forward-facing. They look at open questions, they look at the state of play and where things really should move towards in terms of future direction of research. And these are up to 4,000 words and they're kind of fully peer reviewed, as are the research articles. At the other end of the scale we have opinions, so these are short, pithy, opinionated style pieces, a comment on something topical or controversial or just interesting. And those are kind of fewer than 1,000 words, so they really are quite short and to the point. And then we have essays, which sit somewhere between the two. So they provide the sort of length and the breadth that the narrative reviews do, but they're sort of more focused on, I guess, like an opinionated view of a particular area or field, and they provide a lot more space for discussion of policy implications or practitioner implications or implementation, that kind of thing, basically. So perhaps some thoughts on a particular field, but with the space to discuss those kind of items as well. I should say essays are just on PLOS water, not on PLOS S&T. And this is the publishing process. So it's a quick schematic of the process. It is quite a typical process of journals, so I won't spend ages going over this. Hopefully you might be familiar with this in other journals, but the idea is that you've got some in-house checks that happen on articles when they're first submitted, and there might be some back and forth with authors there to resolve anything that might not be quite correct at that point. An article then moves forward to being assigned to an academic editor, a handling editor effectively, who organises the peer review. So obviously we try and aim to get, if we can, 2 independent reviews on an article. The article then goes back to that academic editor who makes a decision based on those reviews. And then you move through to the next sort of iterations here. So obviously an author generally is asked to revise their paper, and that revised submission is then comes back into PLOS to that academic editor, who then either makes a call on it or, well, will always make a decision, but that decision may be to instigate further rounds of peer review, basically. And it moves through that cycle so you get to the point where it's preliminary accepted, hopefully, at that point there. And the idea then is that we have another in-house team at PLOS that asks for further changes. So these are kind of formatting changes or policy changes, for example, that kind of thing. And after that's all been clarified and updated and everything, once we've got everything we need, it then goes into the production process that takes normally 2 weeks or something, and then it moves forward to being published after that. And then this super dry slide just takes you through a couple of the kind of key facets that we have on PLOS journals that are outside of that standard kind of operational procedure of handling papers. So we have a really cool integration with preprint servers, so specifically Earth Archive, which I appreciate maybe doesn't cover all the areas that we would have here at UNC Water and Health, but the idea is that on submission of an article, on submission to PLOS Water and PLOS S&T, and any PLOS journal in fact, but this archive specifically to those 2 journals, there's an option for PLOS to automatically forward your paper to that archive, basically. So it means that you can share the paper whilst it's still undergoing its peer review. We offer something called published, or sometimes known as transparent peer review. So this is on an opt-in service. So the idea is that an author can decide whether or not the reviews that they receive on their paper will also be published with that article, basically. And the reviewers can also choose whether or not they want to sign that review or not. So that you end up with a sort of a variety, I guess, a range of different transparencies of the peer review, right the way through to the more traditional version where it's just the paper that pops out at the other end, through to the more liberal version where the reviews are also published with the names of the reviewers as well. We have a nice policy that has a terrible name called the Inclusion in Global Research Policy, which is focused on combating what's known as helicopter or parachute research, sometimes referred to as neo-colonial research, where you have actors, researchers from high-income settings that parachute in, work on an extractive model of research, and then effectively pull those research and insights back out of that low-income setting through to a high-income setting or country or region, without properly interacting with the stakeholders from that place or delivering tangible benefits to those places that they took those insights from. So that's all to say that basically the requirement is where a paper appears to be following some facet of that model of research, that we ask authors to complete quite a comprehensive questionnaire as to how they went about doing that research, how they collaborated with local stakeholders, all that sort of thing. And then that's made available to academic editors, to reviewers, who can then comment on the suitability of their approach. It's also then published online with the article if the article is accepted as well. Most of our journals, so PLOS Water and PLOS One, for example, have a very liberal policy when it comes to things called negative and null results or replication studies. So, we encourage those types of studies to be published as part of the academic corpus. It's not just positive results that get published. And then this comes up quite a lot, and I'm happy to go into a bit more detail about this. The article publication charges, it's quite nuanced. There's a lot of detail to this, and obviously it's specific to people's institutions and or situations, but I've tried to summarise a couple of things that we do offer at PLOS. So the first one is that we have institutional partnerships arrangements. So for example, UNC has one directly with PLOS. They're called different names. I put two of them up here because PLOS Water is part of something called Global Equity, and PLOS S&T is part of something called Community Action Publishing. The general thing is that we try and remove the barrier of the article publication charge by partnering directly with institutions. So authors at those institutions don't have to find the funding for an individual APC, article publication charge, for each paper, basically, so it removes that barrier. There are other progressive elements to those policies, which would take me a while to explain, but the idea is that institutions from high-income settings pay more than those from low-income settings, right the way through to some institutions have to pay absolutely nothing at all as well. So if you're interested in the details, I'm happy to speak more about that, but it's quite nuanced, but that's the idea behind those policies, basically, is to take the unfairness and paternalistic kind of history, I guess, of article publication charge and try and remove that as a barrier to publishing. If you don't have one of those situations, we do have automatic waivers according to something called the Research for Life schema, which is a publishing-wide industry kind of setup, basically, where we've defined particular lower middle income countries who will automatically receive waivers, basically, who will never be charged a fee in any of the PLOS journals. And if you fall outside of those two situations, then you can always apply for an ad hoc publication fee assistance program, which is just a way of saying, I've exhausted all my other options, can you consider an ad hoc waiver, basically. Great, Ryan, I think I am handing over to you.
Yeah, so we're really excited. This is actually our second year partnering with PLOS to do a special issue. Last year, a little bit. Pretty good. We didn't quite organize early enough, but we're hoping to get a lot more submissions this year. And so just to kind of give you a quick overview, Jenna, myself, and Kata will help along with Ian to help edit the special issue. But it's the purpose of it is, if you've been to this conference, there's a ton of science that comes out, and a lot of it, especially things like side events and the plenary discussions, there's just so much content that's generated, and it's great that there's now, I think since COVID, most of the sessions are now online. We want to find even more ways to get the science and the policy and practice work from this conference out into the ether through various formats. And so this is a really great option to help do that. And one one of the changes we've made for this year, so you heard from Aaron that it was actually closer to 800 submissions, and for about a little under 200 slots, so it's like a 25% acceptance rate for submissions. I had a paper actually that was accepted at a top field ranked journal that got rejected from this conference. So so it's very, very competitive. So we do want to make it open to other research that many of you all may be working on, maybe your colleagues who are didn't come to the conference or are joining online, to feel free to submit to the special issue if it fits within the scope of the conference and also meets PLOS Water or PLOS SMT's sort of editorial or scope, right? So there's plenty of overlap. We do encourage you to consider submitting related work. So the other thing is that, so as Guy mentioned, essays, opinions, and narrative reviews are slightly different format. If you have a research paper, just submit it as you would to the special, or to either journal, and you'll just say UNC Water and Health Special Collection. There's a little phrase that we have written down somewhere. If you would like to submit an essay, opinion, or narrative review, please first reach out to me and I'll work with Guy and others. We're trying to focus this year the opinion articles on very high level topics. So if you are running like a high level side event or the plenary, the plenary discussion was really excellent, thinking about 2050. If there's sort of these high level topics, we're interested in those for opinion articles. Essays can maybe get a little more nuanced. Again, it's a good outlet if you have an interesting discussion and you want to turn into some sort of opinionated narrative piece. That would be a great idea. Feel free to approach us during the week if you have different ideas. We'd love to get those. I'm going to ask you a question when we get to the Q&A about what an essay is going to look like. Right now, our submission deadline is March 31st of next year. We did last year extend it, but please, we'd love to get your submissions in. And you can let us know if you're planning to submit something. We have sort of a tracker. We'll kind of keep up with that. So why publish in this special collection? Visibility. We have our mailing list for the conference, because of 13 years, is like 20,000 people. So we're working on some ways to advertise articles from the special collection throughout the year. We're looking at maybe making the Water and Health Conference in some way year-round, maybe doing a mini virtual event in the spring. We're looking at a couple of different things, so there's opportunities for advertising. We are also this year going to offer through the PLOS Latitude blog an opportunity. If let's say you're not a researcher, but you feel like you have something to contribute, there's an opportunity to submit to the blog. Or if you publish an article and you want to write a blog post about it, that's another great option. That gets a lot of visibility and traction. The articles will not be held or embargoed until the collection is complete. So once it's gone through peer review and it's been accepted, it'll be available online. There'll be sort of a special landing page that will slowly compile all the articles as they trickle in. So there's no, if you have a really exciting piece of work that you want to get out there, it'll be published online as soon as it is. And and I mentioned the special webpage already. So that's about it. We can talk more.
So just kind of to wrap up a little bit this section, there's a lot of information that we tried to condense into a very short period of time. We might have a ton of questions, or questions might come to you afterwards. So just to say that we've got presence here. So I'm here for the entire week. Myself, Ryan, of course, is here. And we have some of the PLOS editors here as well, who can take questions as well. We've got a table out the front. It's not dressed yet, but it will be there. So just next to the Rosebud room, you'll notice that's where I'll be camping out for some of the week as well. These are the hours that I'll be there. This is not memorable in any way, but we'll put it up on the table. It's to say that basically, in short, I'll be there in the breaks, at lunch, during the first bit of the poster sessions. That's the easiest way to remember it. I'll also be available for a couple of the other, during a couple of the sessions as well. I've got a sign-up sheet down here if you wanted to specifically say that you wanted to come and meet me at a particular time, so I can make that, we can actually have a proper meeting. Got business cards there if you want to take one of those. So it doesn't really matter. At some point there'll be the option to speak to myself, to Ryan, to someone else if you wanted to talk about collection, about PLOS, about publishing in general. We're available basically. And this is just a quick plug for a slightly different but related initiative that we're attempting to run this year. So we have I guess I call it a sort of informal trial of a mentorship scheme, of which a number of people in this room have actually kindly signed up for this to act as mentors. So the idea here is that there are many people in this room that don't have access to the resources that others do, let's say, to be able to engage in the publishing process in ways that others might be able to. So in short, we're setting up a system where we have a group of mentors who are available again throughout UNC, throughout the week here, to just discuss anything to do with academic publishing, journals, writing, navigating peer review. Publishing can be a bit of a black box, a bit opaque. So the idea here is that it's a kind of knowledge share, or just someone to kind of give you a bit of a listening ear, basically. So I have a second sign-up sheet here, and I'll keep that at the PLOS table throughout the week as well. If you wanted to speak to someone and have a kind of 15-20 minute chat during this week, that includes a couple of the PLOS editors as well, and some others as well that have had really great training in things like peer review and publishing and so on. Then please do say, and we'll get your name down, and I can kind of match you up with someone as the week progresses. So it's really nice, and hoping some people take up the option of doing that. Email addresses, I'll just leave this up for a second, in case you want to see the picture. It's not back. As I said, myself, Ryan, both here during the week. Jenna can't be here, but she's hot on the email. So if you did want to drop her a note because you know her, you're familiar with her, then please do email her as well. We can also take questions about the UNC collection at any point as well. It's not just about being here this week. So obviously do reach out if you wanted to ask any other questions as well. Right. That's it for that section. So we've got maybe 20 odd minutes or so, and I'll keep an online group as well, because we've got quite a high number of people online as well who might be wanting to ask questions. So format here is super kind of simple and informal, basically. So we've got 2 PLOS editors plus myself and Ryan. Happy to take questions about anything, might be related to the UNC collection, to publishing, to PLOS, basically anything. And we've got Amy Pickering, so I should introduce them. I'll let them introduce themselves maybe briefly, but I'm sure many of you will have just seen Amy in the plenary session, and Alison Parker from Cranfield University as well, who's here. So they're very familiar with PLOS, the journals, obviously experienced academics, and have published a lot themselves. So just an open session where any of us can answer questions about anything to do with publishing, basically, and just make use of the kind of 20 minutes that we've got. And maybe, shall I keep an eye on the online stuff?
Yeah. Just introduce yourselves.
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Amy Pickering. I'm faculty at UC Berkeley in civil environmental engineering. I'm also a section editor for PLOS Water. I manage the sanitation and health section. And I'm also expanding the scope of that section to include environmental surveillance.
Hi, I'm Alison Parker. I'm a reader at Cranfield University. I'm also involved in the Water Wiser CDT, which got loads of people that have come from. And some of them, we've got a great program of training for them, so some of them have signed up to be mentors as well, so thank you for all of you that have signed up to be mentors. Yeah, and I'm a kind of fairly broad washy, do everything from menstrual health to water harvesting to kind of fecal sludge management. So yeah, cover a lot of the areas that would be in PLOS Water, but certainly, it is very broad in scope.
And I know some other section editors are here at the conference. Musa Manga is a section editor in PLOS Sustainability and Transformation, and I saw Sarah Marks is here too for PLOS Water.
Yeah, two on here as well. So
oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Danielle and Clarissa as well. Questions? Sure. Sorry, we're using the mic for our friends online.
Okay. I wanted to ask about the proposals that we need to send to you. What should we be sending in that proposal, and what happens after?
Yeah, I think if you have an idea, you can send an idea, maybe a title and either a paragraph or an outline of what you're thinking of doing. That would be helpful, and we can work with you on that. And maybe I can ask my question, Guy, if you could talk a little bit about what the format of an essay looks like. I think most of us are familiar with an opinion article. 1,000 words, kind of hard to write, but very short, tight piece. What does it look like to do an essay?
Good question.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, the essay format we're still working on it. It's definitely a work in progress in terms of exactly what we envisage it being. But in terms of the structure, it looks like an opinion piece, except it's probably got it's meant to be longer, so it's got more space to act in that capacity of exploring a topic from an opinionated perspective, basically, but going into more depth on it. So the 1,000-word pieces, they're too short, right? They're great because they're to the point, but you have to cut out a lot of material, you have to remove a lot of references, and there's really not much space there to move into a lot of detail about policy implications, about country-specific examples, about implementation challenges, or about relevance, I guess, to kind of global initiatives like the SDGs or anything of that nature. The kind of big climate organisation initiatives, that kind of thing. So I think what we're envisaging them being is a space for someone to do exactly that, basically, is to go into that much more depth, to provide a lot more context, a lot more references to the relevant literature, and to talk about those kind of the gaps in the knowledge, but also specifically the policy angle of what what the area is, basically. So I think in terms of the structure of the article, we're going to keep it quite flexible. I think there's no point in constraining it, but I think that we've got the first one coming out. In fact, I think Musa is the author of one of the first pieces, should be coming out fairly soon in the UNC collection that is being run from last year's conference. Obviously, this is where it gets confusing. We have the collection from last year's one that overlaps with this year's one being announced, but essentially the pieces that are coming out of last year's one are still coming out, and there's actually an essay coming out. I should probably know this, but maybe in the next week or two it's been accepted, so and we'll be able to kind of it'll be online for everyone to see about the kind of structure. But yeah, I think we're trying to be pretty open with it so that people can kind of be a bit creative with what we see as that format. It's kind of a bit of I think it's just it's a nice way to go into a bit more depth and go into greater depth and be a bit creative, basically, with an article.
I think one thing I wanted to add was, for opinions and narrative pieces, you don't need to follow precisely what you did at a conference. So I'll use an example. Clarissa and I published an opinion article from one of the plenary sessions from last year, and the way we kind of described it is we took the transcript of the whole session, and we kind of deconstructed it and reconstructed it and brought in some other elements to it. So don't make it like here's exactly what we talked about in our session. You can bring in other voices, you can bring in other perspectives. So it's not, precisely what happened at the conference. We hope for you to engage other sources and that sort of thing. Any other questions? Do you have questions online?
Yeah.
Okay. Georgia.
To wait for the microphone.
Okay.
Sorry if you covered this already. Are you taking, is it mainly just going to be these essay style articles, or are you accepting like just regular research articles as well, like quantitative?
Yeah, both, basically, but any and all. So yeah, if you were going to submit to the journal or just journals more generally, then you can submit anything basically that you would normally put into the journal. It's just it's kind of rebadged and pushed into this section of the journal effectively via a web page that we're calling as part of the collection. And in fact, I think this year, let's say that the last year one, which is just coming out now, we probably, like Ryan mentioned, we've got the emphasis was on some of these kind of side events and some of the pieces that were coming out there. So there was maybe not as much of that original research as we kind of hoped, given the quality of the stuff that gets presented. So this year, without, everyone's welcome to pitch an idea and submit their research. So we don't want to constrain it, but I think the balance of the collection will be more representative of the balance of the conference, right? So the majority of it will be research pieces or scoping reviews or systematic reviews, and then you've got a kind of commentary layer of it on top, which is, as Ryan mentioned, we'll curate a little bit more finely, basically. But yeah, anything goes as long as it meets the criteria.
Can I ask another question? Will this edition go under the same ethical rigor as all of the PLOS journals? Because I have submitted something to PLOS 1, and they're still deciding if I meet the ethical requirements or not.
Yes. So it's a good question. It's a really good question actually. Yeah. So it'd be bad if I said no. So yeah, it's basically yes is the answer. So PLOS One and PLOS Water have the same ethical criteria. There's no difference other than the scope. So if you were rejected from someone like PLOS One, there might not necessarily be a reason to come to PLOS Water unless you felt like you're able to make the required adjustments and so on, so things like the ethics or anything else to do with the paper, and then be able to submit to the journal. We do have a different group of editors, so the experience under peer review might be different, I would say, but in general the requirements are basically the same across PLOS One and across PLOS Water and so on. So, but do let me know if there's anything specific to do with that situation that is confusing or.
Yeah, it would be helpful to talk through actually, because I'm trying to argue my case with them presently. But I don't know how.
We've got a real life PLOS person here, so use me as a customer service rep or whatever. But what I would say is it's not. So we didn't go into a huge amount of detail, and maybe I'll use that as an example if that's all right. But basically, we have although the criteria for publishing in terms of demonstrating impact is low or non-existent in the case of PLOS Water and PLOS One, the ethical criteria is quite high. And in order to enact that, we have to set a bunch of rules and policies and so on that are quite strict, if you like, and sort of pro forma. I guess they have to be in order to be able to apply to everybody across every discipline. Now that's great in terms of being able to raise the bar of ethical and reproducibility and so on, but it does mean that the nuance is lost when you have particular people situations basically, and when you get settings where that can't happen basically, or there's good reason for it not to. So that, I will admit, is a difficult thing to manage on the scale that PLOS deals with in terms of tens of thousands of papers per year. So Alison, did you have something to add to that?
Sorry, Ryan. You wanted. I was just going to say in general, I think the advantage of submitting to a special collection like this is you have editors that are more specialised in the type of field. So like I've had papers rejected because clearly the reviewer had no idea what a pit latrine was. Right? It's just like, why is this person who didn't know what a pit latrine was agreed to review a paper that's about pit latrines? And I think you're less likely to get that kind of naive approach from in a special collection like this, because the editors know your field, and then they're going to pick reviewers who are absolutely specialists in your field, and you're going to get a kind of fairer review rather than some of those reviews that you get where you're like, this is just frustrating because the reviewer clearly isn't actually familiar with the field.
Thank you. I had a question on the journal not being registered with the Web of Science and the impact factor issue. How does it work if later it is registered and a paper has already been published?
That's a great question. Yeah, and we get that quite a lot, and it's not obvious. In fact, unless you're familiar with kind of how new journals work. But essentially, the good news is that anything that has already been published in the journal then gets retrospectively added to that index. So, for example, typically it takes anywhere between 5 to 7, even longer years from publishing a first paper through to being assigned an impact factor and being accepted into the Web of Science. So, at the point that they accept you, they then they tend to take on all of the archive of all those papers basically and put them into the index at that point there. It's then possible to quote the impact factor of the journal if you need to at that point. It's not this. I mean, as a side point, this then shows the absurdity of that system, right? Because you may have published a paper 7 years ago and you're now quoting an impact factor from it's a really strange metric to use as a proxy, I guess, for research quality or impact. But nonetheless, all those papers will still be in that indexer. Often it takes 4 or 5 months after it gets accepted for it to be added to the Web of Science. But it will definitely be in there. It just takes a long time for them to make up their minds about journals. But the good news is, to reassure you, all PLOS journals have always been accepted into Web of Science. So every application they've ever made they've been accepted into the Web of Science. There's no reason not to expect that for the newer journals that have been launched in the last few years. It's just it takes a long time. Is that okay?
Hello, 2 quick questions, and I stepped in late, so I may have missed this at the beginning. What was the deadline for the UNC special collection? March 31st of next year, 2025. Okay, and then slightly different, but in terms of topics of what would be allowed into that. So I have some colleagues and we're presenting on kind of a larger swath of a topic. Would that still fall under kind of the guise of what would typically be accepted into this special collection if we want to publish kind of a higher level overview of a topic that's been covered at the conference? Okay, and then if it's including, I take it that if we include information from additional sessions, it needs to be alongside whoever was presenting that information.
What do you mean, like co-authors or?
For example, if there are other groups that are also, I'm presenting on toxic metals. If there are other groups that are also presenting on toxic metals, would you recommend collaborating with them to create a larger overview of the topic that was presented at the conference, or?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the nature of the paper. So I would say if it's original research, then no, because that's obviously standalone piece. If it's one of those kind of narrative reviews, which you might have missed this idea of kind of compiling a lot of the material that's been published recently and talking, like I said, about a bit of an overview style of something, and then kind of looking at the gaps in the field. Yeah, it's probably a good idea to speak to the others, because then you can see if anyone's interested in combining forces and, you know, bringing on other expertise to the authorship list and so on. But it's not a requirement, so you know you can still write that piece yourself as anyone could if they wanted to do a kind of narrative review. It's just it might strengthen it if you wanted to kind of combine forces with the others and talk about some of the research that was presented. So yeah, it kind of depends on what it is. I think for the main thing is if it is a narrative review or an opinion or an essay, these more narrative style pieces, just take that proposal to Ryan in the first instance, and then we can kind of take it forward from there, provide a bit of feedback and direction and that kind of thing.
Great, thank you.
If there isn't, I'll ask one of Amy and then Alison as well, actually. If so obviously you've both published a lot of material, a lot of pieces, dealt with a lot of journals, a lot of editors. Having done all of that, if you were to go back now and start again with your first paper, what is the one thing that you would do differently, or that you'd have learned, or you know, that kind of thing, having dealt with all those types of idiosyncrasies of publishing over the years?
So much advice for papers. Maybe just like some practical advice. Write your method section first, then your results, then do the discussion and intro, and then your abstract. One thing that I think is really helpful is to really think through I wouldn't have more than like 3 to 4 main messages in a paper that you're trying to get across. And everything that you're writing in that paper should be building toward those 3 or 4 messages. One thing I've seen a lot of papers do is just try to cover too much material or be too broad. And so you're really telling the story. And you need to make sure that everything that's going into that paper is like part of that story. And then long titles don't get cited as much as short titles. And also reach out and, you know, get help and get advice and get other people to read your work, because that's always really helpful as well. Even if it's hard feedback, it's always useful because that's your audience, right? Like you're really like familiar with the material and you know what you're trying to say, but you need to get other people to look at it and read it and make sure what you're trying to say is coming through.
Okay, so I'll answer it kind of 2 different ways. So where am I? I'm a handling editor at PLOS One, which means I actually see a lot of papers come across my desk that are, obviously I get papers that are in this kind of field. I'd say make sure you write a really good discussion section, so exactly kind of following on from what you were saying. that really puts your research in that global context, because although PLOS won't, you're allowed to kind of do the same study, like a replication study, like maybe in a different district, but you then have to say, you can't just say, in this particular district, we found this. You need to say, in this particular district, we found this. And that is important to the world because it confirms this, it goes against this, it's different because of this reason. So make sure your discussion section's really good. And there's lots of like generic advice on writing discussion sections, or talk to one of our mentors about what should be in your discussion section. So that would be kind of my top tip for things as what I see as a handling editor. For like thinking back, the way you kind of phrased the question was like, what would you tell your PhD self? I'd say don't be disheartened by desk rejection. Sometimes editors just don't get your paper. And I've had papers desk rejected like 4 or 5 times, and then they've gone on to be do really well in good journals. I think we're less likely to get desk rejections in PLOS because assuming your paper is vaguely on the topic of this conference and it's going into PLOS Water, I think you're not going to be rejected for being out of scope, which is it's a kind of ridiculous thing in this day and age when it's not like no one reads a journal in a book. You just Google it and you're like, oh, there's a paper on that. What is in this journal? Great, I'll read it. But anyway, don't be rejected by things being out of scope, or even people saying, oh, this isn't novel. If you think it's novel, just shout at the wind, come back to it the next day, resubmit it somewhere else and get on with it, and don't get too downhearted because it's really easy to get downhearted from desk rejections. A desk rejection, by the way, is when it doesn't go out to peer review. The editor says, I'm not sending this out to peer review for this reason. So it could be scope or it could be quality, but either of those, don't be disheartened, just resubmit.
I will plug that PLOS has excellent blogs on how to write articles, and we can send those around. The other thing I'd plug is, if many of you know Steve Luby, he's one of our most prolific publishers in our field, and he actually published a free open access textbook on how to write papers in the health sciences. So all the examples in there are also WASH related. So it's a really super helpful resource. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at that.
I just have a question. I use ChatGPT 4.0 and Figshare. How am I going to fit in this?
In terms of writing.
Yes, the writing and then preprint on Figshare. I noticed you were using a different service.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so the preprint, no trouble. You can preprint it wherever you want. The archive is just the integration that we've got is an option basically for authors who might want to do it that haven't already preprinted or don't know where to. ChatGPT question is that's a tricky one. I think that the policy that PLOS has is that you just have to be transparent about your use of any kind of any of those large language model type AI pieces of software, basically, in terms of what role it plays in terms of writing or editing that particular paper. So it's not an outright ban on it. Of course, the intellectual ideas in a paper have to be those of the authors. That should be clear. But the use of those types of pieces of software, basically, to support the writing or editing or whatever it was that it went through, just have to be declared on submission and made obvious and actually written into the kind of declarative bit of the paper, basically, to say this is what you did. So, yeah.
All right, we have to clear out of here for the next session. So please come find the editors or find me at the office hours table, which will be up at the front of the Friday Center near where you got your badge. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks. Feel free to online. See you later.
Before you were writing?
Like to my volunteers.
Just talking about like. Oh, you in here now? I'm gonna go.
I think that's going to be a great opportunity for
There are plenty of domestic journal chapters.
everyone's getting lots of
The license it does depend on what you publish.
Then that's not gonna be like published.
I wish I had thought of it.
It's like if there's a thing about you can do that. There's no stuff you don't just worse actually is it's a cost. It's translated version of it's actually available, so it depends on the mechanism you want to tell me. This is
Down a bit.
so nice.
A bit.
And that's what I'm like,
There it is. It's stuff running across it, and you know,
give myself some
it's so good. It's sort of like
have
to watch the side, you know, honestly, you know what I mean? It's very much so.
yeah, which is
That makes so slow. It's such a pain in honesty.
Is there a session?
It's mine, isn't it? Which is a specific language, totally, yeah. So like you're just like slightly behind to then publish it in an international, you know, whatever. Like the sort of irony of that is not it's just like, yeah, it's just one of those things, right? We're still trying to publish it is one of those like, yeah, those publishers it's like sloshing around, so you can't not to say that's the only problem, but you know, yeah, but that's what I would yeah. Yeah, that's great. Do you know, there's always some journals that actually do in other languages, which is like abstract. I always say, yeah, the idea is